Welcome, everybody, to Climate Europe to fourth festival. This is the fourth festival of the project that is dedicated to supporting and standardizing climate services. We are here today with a very particular focus on this year, and that is dedicated to explore together with a large variety of multi-stakeholder panelists between today and tomorrow, what are the interrelations between adaptation and mitigation with a focus on climate services for cities. So we will use the topic of climate services as a link between the needs of adaptation and mitigation, and we will zoom in the topic of cities. Let me run you a little bit through the specifics of the program. Just today, we will start with a little bit of an opening, and I will be presenting to all of you some of the key findings that the Climate Europe 2 Consortium has had in the past year. And then we will move to a panel that will introduce you a group of people from policy, science, the private sector, exploring and starting the discussion about these links between adaptation and mitigation. After the coffee break, we are going to go deeper into the role of climate services in cities. And then we will move into exploring some new European and national initiatives in this topic. And after the last coffee break of the day, we will have a very hands-on session focus on Destination Earth and the digital twin for climate adaptation. And there will be some exercises and, again, hands-on about the topic of user needs. We are running this webinar on using the Q&A tool. And because of the way the system works, we would like to sort of make sure that if you would like to appear on a screen and ask your question directly, which will be great, please, when you write your question, include on a screen at the beginning of it, so the moderators that are running the technicalities behind are able to unmute you and are able to give you access to the camera. Okay, so we are looking forward to a very interactive day. Please ask as many questions, please participate. And without further ado, I think I want to give the floor to our coordinator of the project, Paco Doblas Reyes. He is the director of the Earth Sciences Department at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center and ICREA professor. Paco, please, on to you.
Thanks a lot, Anson. Welcome all the participants to the fourth Climate Europe 2 Festival. It's great to see that there are so many people joining this event that is organized by the European Climate Europe 2 project, which is funded by the European Commission through the Horizon Europe research program. Climate Europe 2 aims at formulating recommendations for the standardization of climate services, building upon experiences that are collected from the network of climate services in Europe and beyond, with the aim to provide information for the normalization body in Europe, Sensenelec, to formalize the standardization of climate services. There are many partners involved in this project. It's a very large project. You can find it in the project website. And among the different activities that we undertake to get close to the community, to really create and foster this network of climate services actors in Europe and in other continents, we organize festivals, which are events that are taking place online, where we give the floor not just to the partners in the project. It's not an event. It's not a kind of event where we try to publicize the results from the project, but it's more a platform for other projects, other initiatives, both on the national and international level, other other fora that are looking for a place to voice their concerns and results, and also to get together. So somehow these festivals are an opportunity for the community to voice their interests and also to formulate what we have to take into account in these recommendations that we are putting together in the Climate Europe 2 project. This is the fourth festival. You can find the information and also the recordings from previous festivals visiting the project website. You can also find the links to these events in the at the bottom of the agenda that is made available in the page for the fourth festival in the Climate Europe 2 project website. And also you can find there links to other events that we're organizing in the project. As I said, this is an event that is expected to be participatory and also to be used to gather as much feedback from the community as possible. So following what Asun said, don't hesitate to formulate your questions, comments, disagreements in the Q&A section of the Zoom application. And don't hesitate to participate also on screen, because this is an event for everyone. The panelists, moderators, and speakers are here to foster the discussion and to promote exchange and motivate the other people's participation. I wouldn't be able to finish this initial welcoming without thanking all those colleagues that have made possible the organization of the festival, who have been working for several months to identify panelists, to organize the agenda, to create all the visuals that are being used in this event, and also to organize all the details that make this Zoom webinar possible. So in particular, I would like to thank the colleagues at CMCC who are supporting the technical aspects of the festival organization. And that's everything from my side. Thanks very much for joining us, and back to you, Asun.
Thank you very much, Paco. So we are going to proceed, and before we dwell into the topic of this particular festival on the links between adaptation and mitigation within the context of cities, what we wanted to do is to share with you the initial set of key messages that the consortium has come up last year. This is the second time the project issues these 9 key messages. Let me explain a little bit the process at which we arrived to these key messages. The consortium in the different work packages and within the different topics has explored what can be potential requirements for climate services that are fit for purpose. And within that analysis, we have come up with a series of recommendations of what could be a good set of thinking strategy for standardizing climate services. Let me run through these 9 messages just very, very quickly. Excuse me. So the first message is that it is fundamental to have a holistic vision of climate services. Climate services are not only providing data, climate data and information. This is per se insufficient. We need to really see them from a very broad point of view, and very much in particular, we need to ensure that climate services are understood with a greater focus on inclusivity and very focused on really being able to provide effective, equitable, and robust climate action through making sure that they are responsive to the actual context in which that data, climate data, and information needs to be applied. So that is our first opening message, that holistic vision and that sort of big sweep in our understanding of climate services. The second key message is that when one really works hard at thinking what should be the standardization of climate services, how can we start thinking about it? It is very important to think about the necessity to have not only one or two, but a suite of very diverse type of standards. Standards are very, very different. They can be technical specifications, they can be processes, they can be quality management, and they can be performance. There are many different types of standards, and a good standardization process of climate services is going to require a combination of these standards. Let me explain in detail the three types in particular that we have found out. So the first is that there is still a need of technical standards. Even though there are guidance documents, many issues remain without harmony. New knowledge is available, and the project is exploring new issues that need to be standardized, that need to be integrated with the existing available technical specifications in relation to climate data. And very much in particular at the technical level, the topic that the consortium has found of particular importance is this integration between climatic and not climatic data, information, and knowledge. So that is one of the fields where technical standards can really make a contribution. The second type of standards relates to processes. So climate services development and delivery are very dependent on a range of processes. And I think most of you who work on climate services already know and acknowledge that co-design, co-production are fundamentally important for successful and effective climate services. But there are other processes that are also important for the uptake and for the inclusiveness of climate services. For example, subsidiarity, in-depth stakeholder mapping, the creation of partnerships conducive to market creation, or the innovation friendliness. And all these issues are dependent on quality processes during the creation and the implementation of climate services. So that is what Climate Europe 2 Consortium wants to put forward, is technical standards, but it's also procedural standards, what we need to be thinking about. And this will be as well incomplete unless we need to think as well how to capture minimum thresholds of performance across all the different components of climate services, not only for providers, but also for users. So we also think that and find out and explore a series of requirements where what in order to make them effective, what it will need is the creation and the maturing of a performance standard or a set of performance standards that can provide those thresholds, and eventually later on think about indicators, measurement, and agreement on what should be the threshold for providing evidence. However, standards by themselves in Climate Europe 2, we also explore the limitations of standardization, and also many of the aspects that the services need to provide are probably most unlikely being able to be captured by formal standards. So the consortium argues and puts forward to the community the idea that these standards need to go hand in hand with flexible and perhaps more accessible best practice guidance that can guide the community in a more less prescriptive manner, and perhaps also in a faster way, because the standards, formal standards, after all, take quite a lot of time to mature. So these less prescriptive guidance documents are important because of the urgency to ensure that the quality, the climate services are of a minimum quality and fit for purpose as soon as possible, but also can serve to create readiness and preparedness for the formal standards and for the application of the formal standards. So this is the complementarity of this best practice guidance. Furthermore, the project is obviously identifying quite a lot of knowledge gaps that are going to have to be filled not only by the research community, but by a very strong collaboration across different multi-stakeholders, including the private sector, including policy, and including users. So the research community really alone cannot fill this gap. We need a coordinated effort across all the other societal actors that are involved in the creation and in the implementation of climate services. The last two messages are more policy related. We think that the European Commission is in a position to lead efforts to build suitable governance mechanisms for climate services. Even the standards or guidance might not be enough. There will be need for coordination efforts, for oversight, and for all sorts of other forms of governance. And here the European Commission is on the position of oversight and has access to a set of directorates and research bodies that will need to be coordinated to contribute to this setup of a governance system that is complete and that is possibly ongoing and changing. And lastly, this consortium has two major public providers as partners in the consortium, the World Meteorological Organization and ECMWF, which hosts the Copernicus system of Earth services. And here the message is that there has to be a strengthened collaboration, not only between these two core actors, but also with national hydrometeorological bodies and other different types of public actors involved in the provision and the delivery of climate services. So with these key messages, we would like now to return to the topic of this Webstival. As we said at the beginning, is focused on trying to understand the relationship between adaptation and mitigation, the relevance of climate services and the use of climate services for mitigation, and in particular within the context of cities. The panel that we are opening now has participation from scientists, but also from policymakers and from the private sector. We would like to start with you, Anna Sørensen. Thank you very much for joining us today. Anna Sørensen from the University of Buenos Aires is going to give us the perspective of science through her work in the latest IPCC assessment report, which was focused precisely on looking into this relationship between adaptation and mitigation. On to you, Anna.
Thank you for the invitation to participate in this event. So I am Anna Sørensen. I'm a senior researcher at the University of Buenos Aires and focusing on climate change and its interaction with soil, land, and vegetation in Southeast and South America. So yes, my contribution today is from my participation in the synthesis report, from the last assessment, AR6. This is the report that came out in 2023. And a key message from this report is that rapid and far-reaching transitions across all sectors and systems are necessary to achieve deep and sustained emissions reduction, and here, most important, secure a livable and sustainable future for all. And this report also shows the actions that can be implemented to achieve this. There is a calculation in the report on potential of mitigation per sector, and it says that in near term that is achievable until 2030 would be a reduction of around 2/3 of current emissions per year. So in this opening remark, I will give 2 examples of emissions reductions or mitigation and how the synthesis report links them to synergies with adaptation, and also argue that climate services are necessary to achieve this. So next slide, please. Okay, so here you can see the most promising sector today is the energy sector. If there's been sustained decreases in the unit of cost, which you can see here in the market cost graphs. When you come, so it's from 2000 to 2020, you can see that coming down to the yellow, there is lower cost than fossil fuels for solar, onshore and offshore wind. And you can also see the market adoption, which has raised enormously during this 20 years. And in many regions, transitioning to low emission systems like these can be cheaper than maintaining the emission intensive system. Next, please. And this sector has synergies with adaptation because you get larger energy reliability, you have diversification, access and stability of the electricity system in a changing climate. They are more resilient, right? And of course, climate services are necessary for these mitigation projects. Although in the synthesis report, it is not said in that kind of words, it's not used like climate services, but of course you need to know how will the sunlight hours change, the temperature, the seasonal and diurnal variability of wind speed and consistency, wind direction, precipitation, snowfall, extreme weather events, to know where it is suitable to place these renewable energy plants. Next one, please. The other one I wanted to bring up is the land, water and food sector, which is a sector that is not very, very cost effective. I mean, it's cheap, it's more expensive. You have to put in much more money for this sector to work in terms of mitigation and the adaptation. So next one, please. So some of the mitigations options that can bring most emission reductions are ecosystem maintenance and restoration, carbon sequestration in agriculture, reforestation and afforestation. And the synergies with adaptation is improved cropland management, biodiversity management, and ecosystem connectivity. And of course, climate services is really needed for this. We know, for example, in the Mediterranean, there are reforestation and afforestation projects, but perhaps they don't have as much water as they would actually need to work. And in other places in the world, this is also happening. So having a really good information on how the water cycle will change and how the fire weather will change in the future is crucial to be able to implement these options. So over to you, Asun.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I realized that also I was speaking with my camera off because the click didn't work. Apologies for that. Thank you very much for this presentation about the scientific perspective. And we would like, Paco, now that you complement a little bit what Anna was saying. I know you don't have any slides, so I will leave this slide on. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Asun, and thanks, Anna, as well for this lovely introduction to the role of both climate adaptation and mitigation. Now, I'll be very brief here. One of the motivations behind focusing this WebCivil to talk about climate adaptation and mitigation in the context of climate services was that often we find that the climate services is understood as a tool for climate adaptation. And this is all very good. It emerges from some of the definitions and concepts that were introduced in the global framework for climate services that were mainly targeting developing countries, and eventually it was taken up by other countries in at the global scale, because adaptation is now unavoidable and it's necessary in all over the world, because climate change, anthropogenic climate change, is expressing itself at the regional scale in many different ways, as Anna is illustrating. The point is that the role of climate services for mitigation has been less clear. It has been a bit hiding. And we think that it is important to raise the profile of climate services as a way to provide solutions for climate mitigation that are well informed. Climate services is the set of processes that provide climate information for decision making in the correct context, taking into account values, power relations, equity, and many other social factors. And this is equally applicable to both adaptation and mitigation. The same could be said about climate-related risk assessment, which again is not necessarily directly connected to adaptation, because risk assessment is only one step before adaptation and other measures are taken. And again, climate-related risk assessment requires climate services, because it's probably the only way to make sure that the climate information is co-produced with those that are going to make decisions and are going to make the assessments that will somehow lead some of the decisions in both adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation and mitigation come together in several geographical areas and timescales. We thought that one of the most obvious areas where adaptation and mitigation come closer together are the urban areas. The reason is that urban areas are one of the key actors when it comes to emissions, not just in terms of local emissions, but also emissions due to consumption of goods and services in the urban areas, mainly because the economic wealth in those areas and the concentration of population. At the same time, it's more increasingly obvious that cities need to formulate ambitious climate adaptation plans. This is because, given precisely the concentration of assets and population, there are the risks that are faced by urban areas are much larger than many other regions of the planet. And that means that the climate adaptation plans cannot be formulated completely disconnected from the climate mitigation ambitions at the urban areas. Cities have played a very important role when it came to formulate ambitious mitigation targets. That has been obvious both in the Conference of the Parties, but also in many other fora where cities have been given a voice. Somehow, what we want to promote with Climate Europe 2, and in particular with the formulation of climate services that is cutting across the different climate-related problems and challenges, is that cities offer a unique opportunity to bring together examples where we can see the co-benefits of formulating climate adaptation and mitigation plans all together. So somehow this is the main challenge here. Again, we are not expecting to provide a final solution from Climate Europe 2, but already putting this challenge on the table and talking about it will make it more obvious and will help decision makers to frame their decisions in the right context, and climate services also to provide the information that will underpin the decisions that have to be made by those decision makers. So over to you, Asun, and thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paco. To both of you, Paco and Anna, presenting this sort of scientific perspective on these links between mitigation and adaptation and the key role they have in cities. However, we are very lucky now to introduce you to our next two panelists that are working on the reality of actually making this happen. And first and foremost, I would like to give the floor to you, Lan-Marie Berg, which is a member of the Norwegian Parliament, and is speaking here with her experience as former deputy mayor of the city of Oslo, actually implementing mitigation and adaptation strategies. We are doing good time, so please maybe you can say a little bit more about yourself, Lan-Marie. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I think someone turned off my video, so someone from the host side needs to put it on again because I'm not able to from my side. But I can start. Oh, thank you so much. Hi, and thank you, Asun. So a little bit more about me. Today, I'm MP and I'm a member of Parliament in the Norwegian Parliament for the Green Party. But this picture is from 2015, when I was about to become Vice Mayor for Environment and Transport in the city of Oslo. So between 2015 and 2023, the Green Party were kingmakers in the city council. And we used this opportunity to implement huge changes in the city and faster also than anyone thought was possible. For example, in the streets, giving space for public transport, bicycles and pedestrians. Also in the waterways and rivers, opening them up for the public, and at the same time ensuring better climate adaptation, but maybe most importantly at the climate governance level, which will be my main focus today. So then we can go for the next slide, please. And it's really exciting for me to attend this Climate Europe 2 Webstival, also to learn more about what's happening on the research side and in other cities as well. And I will start elaborating a little bit on how the city of Oslo worked to integrate climate services in its decision-making processes while I was vice mayor. So next one, please. In Norway, we have a national center for climate services that was established in 2014, providing detailed information on how climate change will affect different regions in Norway. And then next one. And under my leadership, the city of Oslo also established a permanent climate agency in 2016. Consisting of 30 experts with the mandate to ensure that climate change mitigation measures at first are implemented across all sectors and agencies of the city. And now it also has a similar mandate on climate adaptation, which I will also come back to. So next one, please. So here you see how both of these organizations come together, or knowledge come together to try to create knowledge about how we should meet future climate change. So in 2020, the Oslo Climate Agency released a report on climate vulnerability, combining knowledge provided by the Climate Services Center with knowledge from 15 city agencies, which you see there, on how climate change will affect their provision of services. Next slide, please. So, oh no, go back. The process of making the report gave the city agencies knowledge on how climate change will affect their sectors in the future, and a lot of the agencies didn't have this knowledge before. And both decision makers on all levels and the agencies gained knowledge on, one, how climate change already affects service provision in the city today or at that time, and two, what changes the city had to adapt to in the future, which in Oslo is mainly more precipitation and a warmer climate, but also a lot of other things, and also gaps in available information in the governing frameworks. Then we can go to the next slide, please. And so the reason why the city of Oslo could do this kind of work where we combined the knowledge from all of these agencies so efficiently was because we already had implemented a system for climate governance, which is the climate budget. So the city of Oslo developed, as the first city in the world in 2016, a climate budget. And at first, the climate budget was for mitigation only, but in 2024, climate adaptation was also included, with Oslo as the first city in the world, with New York and Mumbai. So the climate budget is Oslo's key tool to achieve its mitigation goals and now also the adaptation goals. The budget is a tool to operationalize the aim to become a zero-emission city by 2030 on an annual basis. So simply put, the climate budget is part of the actual annual municipal budget, the monetary budget, where all measures needed to cut emissions are included, with a responsible vice mayor in charge, together with estimates on how many tons of CO2 it will cut. That's for the mitigation side. And the importance of this is that earlier, at least in Norway, and I guess also other places, climate change action or climate action has been seen as a sort of a sector interest of the climate minister or of the vice mayor for environment and transport in my case. But this is actually making climate action sector-wide and making all the leaders in the different sectors responsible for their actions. So all agency leaders are made responsible for the climate budget in their budget allocation letters, and they must report on their tasks alongside the fiscal reporting, which means 3 times a year. So in this way, all leaders in the city are measured on climate action throughout the year. So the next slide, please. And this is my last slide for now. So just some quick takeaways that I'll also be happy to elaborate on in the discussion, like climate mitigation, climate adaptation needs to be integrated in all sectors and levels of government. So if we want to ensure that climate services are integrated in our decision-making processes, climate governance is crucial. In my experience as vice mayor in Oslo and also a green politician in Norway for the past 10 years, sector-wide integration of climate services needs to come from the top, because it's just such a hard job to integrate climate services and knowledge about how climate change will affect us and what we should do about it in all sectors. But input to policy development and needs in service provision needs to be bottom up. And I think several of the speakers before me were speaking about how short a time we have to mitigate and adapt to climate change so fast that we have little time to sort of find best practices and develop our policies, and we have to work as we go, which is not so which is faster than the government's usually works. So therefore, it's really important to also know what's happening on the ground and to integrate this in. So, and then when we integrate climate action in existing governance systems like the budgetary process, then we ensure this learning process about how we best develop policies for climate mitigation and adaptation. And we ensure that it happens in a cyclical way throughout the year, all the time, because all the time the agencies are working on the budget and involves all levels of government. So just to put it into sort of a wider frame than Oslo, the Oslo climate budget has been adopted by the C40, and now the 100 cities in the network, together representing about 22% of the world's GDP, will implement similar climate governance structures within 2030. So this is a good opportunity to do research on both the cities like New York, Mumbai, Rio, several other cities who have already implemented climate budgets from the Oslo model, and to look at the different cases to see the problems or the best practices that perhaps you can find in different cities. And lastly, I think I just want to say that the Oslo analysis, which I talked about earlier, show that there are synergies, and there are also conflicts, and important conflicts with, between adaptation and mitigation in Oslo. But what we know is that we need climate services for both, because both needs to take into account knowledge about how climate will change our city. So then I look forward for the discussion later, and back to you, Espen.
Thank you very much, Lamari, for this presentation about the experiences in the city of Oslo, and also the difficulties and challenges, but also the achievements. Thank you. We will pick up on some points. Thanks very much. Good. I would like to give the floor now to our next speaker, Philippe Lefebvre from Vito, from the private sector, to offer a perspective of the work that you are doing. If you can take some time also, Philippe, to introduce yourself, that would be great. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Asun. Thank you for the introduction. And also thank you to the previous speakers, which were highly inspirational. So I will start by introducing myself and maybe also Vito. So Vito is not really a private company, maybe a rectification. So we are a research and technology organization, of which the shares are in the hands of the Flemish government. So we have a mission to stimulate innovation, and we work, so we are about 1,000 people large. We do applied science, and we work around 3 themes: regenerative economy, so everything to do with energy and materials, healthy environments, and resilient ecosystems. So resilient, and that's where our team, the climate impacts team, where I'm part of, belongs to. So in the climate impacts team, and we are about, let's say, 20 to 30 people. If you also include other disciplines besides climatologists and geographers, we also have a large IT component for the development of climate services. So, and in the team, we're developing climate services on behalf of local authorities, regional authorities, national and European and international authorities. So we're really looking, or we really want to develop something that is of use, that can be used by the clients, by the stakeholders. But on the other hand, we're also participating in Horizon Europe and in research programs to gather the knowledge that we need for our services. So this was a kind of introduction on Vito and the team and myself. So maybe if you can go now to the next slide. So I only have one slide to show you, to introduce you a bit our team, what we're doing. So there's a link on the top where you can find, which is a bit of a micro website with all the activities that we're doing. But this one slide, I think, summarizes it a bit in a schematic way. So in the team, we're doing a large variety of activities that all fall under the umbrella of climate services, in my opinion. So, and if I go now from top to bottom, so we have 4 major categories of activities that we're doing. So first of all, and urban areas are one of our focus domains, core topics. So this falls matches nicely with the topic with the theme of the Webfestival of today. But first activity that we're doing in particular in cities where there's not so much data available, is what we call the urban mapping. So we at the urban scale, you need detailed information about land cover, land use, about activities, about the presence of green vegetation, and so on. So we do that by using different methodologies, which starts from citizen science. So organizing data collection campaigns. We also make use extensively of remote sensing, which is really last year is really offering an increased amount of usable data to also work at the urban scale. So in the past, the resolution was a problem, but more and more there is now data available that has a resolution that is usable at the urban scale. So you can distinguish buildings, streets, garden, parks, and so on. And we also integrate all that information inside GIS environments so that the users, the stakeholders can explore their city from a different perspective than usual. Secondly, we do monitoring campaigns, and for example, on the topic of heat, we have different equipments that we use for that. Automatic weather stations. There's mobile monitoring where you install sensors on bikes, on cars, on buses. We also use remote sensing for monitoring purposes. There's, for example, the LST variable that can be measured. And so this monitoring is important because it connects with people on the ground. It increases let's say the support or the interest in the topic. It also allows to collect, let's say, evidence that cannot be denied because it was collected on the ground, sometimes using citizens and so on. So it's maybe not always needed for the impact modeling steps, because we have tools that we are quite confident about, but it has a really value in connecting with the people in the city. A third step is what we call the impact modeling. And for example, in our team, we're quite focused on everything to do with heat. We have our own modeling suite that we developed for that, the URCLIM, based on the URCLIM model. But we also look now more towards indoor thermal comfort, because people stay inside a lot of the time. So you cannot only consider outdoor environment, but you also have to look into indoor heat stress, for example. And this impact modeling tries to evaluate impacts of climate change by calculation of indicators. And we look at impact on public health, on energy, labor, and infrastructure sectors, for example. And the last step, or let's say following step, is to use that information in adaptation support and capacity building. At that stage, we also develop climate dashboards, so that the evidence is there. It stays after the end of the project, so it's a lasting result, and it is used in events and stakeholder workshops to develop climate adaptation strategies, for examples. But as the topic of today is also about the combined mitigation adaptation activities, we also are developing more and more now indicators that are relevant for mitigation purposes. So I think this summarizes a bit the activities that we're doing, and I'm open to any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I think the description of the adaptation services shows the sort of broad scope that climate services need to cover, and the different technical, procedural, and performance aspects actually that we were discussing. Very good. I would like now to, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I would like to invite Lan-Marie and Paco and Anna to open your cameras and maybe we can all be on the spot. There we are. Organizers are putting this as we speak. Excellent. Very good. So before I start taking the questions that hopefully we have in the Q&A, I would like to. We have Anna missing from. It's coming. I would like to initiate a little bit of discussion amongst ourselves first, and this is perhaps a question for both of you, Anna and Lan-Marie, from the two different perspectives, the science and the implementation, and that is related to a point, Lan-Marie, that you mentioned at the end but didn't elaborate, which is that the adaptation and mitigation have a lot of synergies, right? And Anna, you have shown them on the science. But you also mentioned that there might be conflicts, right? And one can clearly see the potential trade-offs, the political capital you need to divide, but how much political capital you want to invest on the adaptation and mitigation, but it's also a matter of resources. So Anna, why don't you tell us first, what's the topic of trade-offs between adaptation and mitigation discussed? And the reason I'm interested on this is because one of the key roles that I also heard from all of you climate services can play, and I think Paco, you indicated that as well as Philippe, is to actually be able to use one resource for multiple purposes, right? So to create efficiency. So Anna, first, in the IPCC, did you explore these trade-offs between adaptation and mitigation, first at a generic level, and then Lan, can you explain a little bit the experience that you had?
The reply to if it was assessed in the synthesis report and by IPCC, yes, definitely. So both synergies and trade-offs are available in the report. So do you want example of those? You can think about, for example, if you think about all the pathways that go down, that maintain 1.5 or 2 degrees, you will have to do massive implementation of re- and afforestation and other land-based carbon capture methodologies. So those are actually, when there's a lot of talk about carbon dioxide removal, but only the land-based carbon dioxide removal options are actually in place, and we know how they work and they are implemented and we know that they work. Okay, but how, of course, if you plant, do these trees over large areas, you will interfere with other needs of human beings, sort of as water and food. So that is one of the, in the land sector, you can have both synergies and trade-off with adaptation and sustainable development goals.
Yes, and thank you for the interesting sort of questions and also for your presentation, Anna, because it was really interesting to see it from the science side. So of the synergies that was identified in the Oslo analysis were that better and more diverse forest management help hindering forest fires, and then also ensures more uptake of CO2. So that's one. The second one was that restoration of bogs. We have a lot of, like, to give a bit of context, around 70% of the area of Oslo is woods, but we don't build in the woods, we build in the building zone, which is sort of in the center of the whole area of Oslo. And Oslo is one of the, has been for several years, one of the fastest growing cities in Europe in percentage-wise, because it's a small city to start with. But that also means that we have a lot of nature that we can preserve, and the nature-based solutions, I think, provide some synergies. So the other one is restoration of bogs, ensuring more uptake of both water, which is a problem for Oslo. Precipitation will increase by 20% in Oslo, and everything is sort of pouring. When it's pouring down, it's also running down the city, because Oslo is formed like a sort of slide for the water, so everything will run down the city to the city center and can make a lot of damage. So so if we do restoration of bogs, then we will take up more water and also more CO2, and then also more vegetation in the city will prepare us for more heat waves. Will drain water on the way, which is one of our strategies to deal with a lot of more water in the city, and it will help with CO2 uptake a little bit at least. And then lastly, insulating homes and buildings will make them more prepared for heat waves and more energy efficient. So that's some synergies, but I mean, they're not that huge in the sense, because a city space is small, and even though we have a lot of woods in Oslo, they are already woods. We didn't cut them down, so we can't really increase CO2 uptake that much. But the conflicts are quite important as well, and the report states that so like we are trying and have been trying as politicians to build a more densely populated city that reduce the need for mobility, or reduce the need for traveling a lot, and actually increases mobility in a sense. And that also reduces CO2 emissions and the need for infrastructure. So it's sort of good climate mitigation to ensure that we build a denser city. But at the same time, if we build a denser city, the city can be built less climate resilient, because it might result in less soft surfaces, and which we need to adapt to more extreme rainwater events. And some other effects can also be that a denser city structure with higher buildings and stuff will also affect wind and waterways in the city. So that's some problems in Oslo, and maybe also in other cities.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. Maybe you also want to tell us a little bit.
Yeah, I was also
Go ahead.
Dan was talking. I also had some reflections in my mind. So I think that indeed there are synergies and there are trade-offs. So I think what is needed is a systemic, integrated approach that takes into account both mitigation and adaptation. But yeah, the synergies are, I have a few one in my mind. So for example, one that was not yet mentioned is the role of promoting or active mobility, so walking and cycling in the city, and also ensuring that this can be done during extreme events, so that that active mode remains operational. To give you an example, we have collected data showing that during heat waves, if your cycling paths are fully exposed, nobody cycles anymore, nobody walks. So what do people do? They recur to a more motorized traffic if there is no public transport. So I think a good synergy is the creation of transport infrastructure that is operational even during extreme events. I think you can also think of cycling paths that during flooding events are still usable. And also nature-based solution was already mentioned, but okay, there's a clear so they capture CO2 emissions, but also if you think about the topic of heat stress, urban heat, having green in the city is the most effective way to reduce heat stress. So that's a very nice synergy. There are also less positive trade-offs, such as, for example, the use of air conditioning. It's very effective in reducing health impacts of heat, for example, but they are not. It's not so energy sufficient. And also the long-term and short-term perspectives of adaptation and mitigation sometimes conflict. So I think, I think you need good analysis before you take decisions. So and maybe extend the time frame a little bit longer to also have positive effects with respect to adaptation, for example.
Thank you, Philippe. I would like to throw a question at you, Paco, an easy one. What does it need to happen in science so climate services can really be addressing both adaptation and mitigation? Is there?
Yeah, thanks, Asun. I think the first thing to do is to avoid containerization, is to stop splitting mitigation and adaptation. So at the IPCC level, we have the people that are mainly dealing with adaptation in working group 2, people dealing with mitigation in working group 3, people dealing with the physical aspects of other things in working group 1, but then working groups 2 and 3 only get together when during the synthesis report, which is what Anna has experienced. And it really great things happen there when they get together. It's at that point when you start seeing and identifying lots of things that people usually don't think about, and new challenges, potential solutions. The same happens during the 1.5 degree report in 2018, the one that was published already 7 years ago. The whole all the working groups came together. Those boundaries were automatically removed because the report had to be very cross-cutting by design, and again it made it a really different report, something really special that made a lot of impact at the policy level. And we all know the consequences of this, and it's very much related to what happened in Paris 3 years before the publication of the report. So removing those boundaries at the scientific level will do a lot of good. It will also improve the services that we can provide, and it will help us to support some of the aspects that are that have been a challenge and will be even a greater challenge in the future, which is the communication of all this. So in Climate Europe 2, we look at climate services from a component point of view. One of the components is a delivery mode of the climate information. So it's not just climate information, so what you have to say, but how do you say it, and in what way, taking into account who's listening to you. And it's pretty obvious that mitigation has a worse reputation than adaptation at the societal level. So it's the penetration of mitigation solutions are always finding a more refractory attitude from society because it's associated with money. So it's going to cost me something, or I'm going to pay some more for, I don't know, an electric car, or I'm going to pay more for renewable energy, depending on the country. While for adaptation, the attitude is much more positive because it has to do with life and goods, and it's preserving what you have. The point is that by removing those boundaries, we can also help the communication of the climate information, regardless of whether it's referring to adaptation or mitigation. It's not the same telling someone, actually in a Mediterranean country, you have to invest to insulate your house because this is going to reduce your potential emissions, your carbon emissions. And someone will say, well, how much is this going to cost me? And how long will it take me to get a return for my investment? While if the thing is presented well, at the same time, you're sure that you're not dying in summer during a heat wave inside your house. So if everything is part of the same narrative, for sure it doesn't make our publications easier at the scientific level, but at the communication and policy-making level, the whole story is completely different because it's all part of the same adaptation and mitigation in certain respects, not in everything, but in certain respects, it's all part of they are both sides of the same coin.
Thanks, Paco. Thanks, Paco. Good. we actually have quite interesting questions from the Q&A. Unless you want to jump in, any of you, to continue this? Yeah. Okay, Lan, go ahead. Philippe, also, I see you have unmuted.
Thank you.
Just go ahead.
I think that Paco's what Paco said was really interesting, because I also think that adaptation is basically more about preparedness and health right now, and maybe it could help sort of emphasizing that a lot of some things that we can do that also is also good for mitigation, is good for you, for your health and for your security. So that's really an interesting point of view, because we know that health issues, for example, make people more willing to spend money right now. But at the same time, I think that politically, my experience is that it's so difficult to get money for adaptation. I think we've come so much further, at least in the Norwegian perspective, and Norway hasn't cut so many emissions compared to a lot of European countries. But to spend money on mitigation, to have focus on mitigation, whereas I'm not even sure that most politicians are even very aware of adaptation needs in the city or in the national government, and they're not really willing to spend a lot of money on adaptation because they don't really know about the dangers. However, I think that preparedness in the society, in Norway at least, in the Norwegian context, and I guess also a lot of other places after COVID and after Russia's full invasion of Ukraine, is more on the top of the agenda, which means that we could also try to put adaptation in sort of a societal preparedness context to try to get more money for it. But I'm just afraid, and I also think that the analysis that they did with the agencies in Oslo also shows that the knowledge about climate adaptation and how we have to prepare for them in all those sectors is just too low at the moment. So that's at least my concern from the political point of view.
Thank you, Lan. Philippe, you also wanted to say something? I would before Philippe goes, I am reflecting, Lan-Marie, whether this reluctance to pay for adaptation is also a specific of being a Scandinavian country, where sort of the climate vulnerability is a lot less on your face, so to speak, than in a Mediterranean country where the impacts go directly into health issues. But it's an interesting point. Okay, Philippe and Anna, and then we'll take the questions from the audience.
Yeah, my mic was open by accident, but I can still maybe have a reflection. I think that the mainstreaming of climate adaptation in all sectors is still something that is not happening enough. I think there is we need more stringent guidance, and even I think standardization or protocols that include this a bit longer time frame of to integrate climate change into the process. So this is happening. It is happening left and right, but it is still not obligatory in many sectors. It's still a lot voluntary. So I think there is room for improvement to make it a bit more obligatory activity, and that will pay back, because climate adaptation is not always costing more money. I've learned it's about doing things a bit different. To prepare for the future. So I think there is, but it depends on the political will to add an additional layer of complexity to the society, and it's not always the first priority, I think, of people, unfortunately.
Thanks, Philippe. Anna, please.
Yeah, I also thought Paco's comment was really interesting, because here in Argentina, I also feel like Lan-Marie, it's on the contrary, and also in the synthesis report, it's like worldwide, there's so much more financiation for mitigation than for adaptation currently, right? And here in Argentina, I can just tell you, like anecdotally, perhaps, I don't know, or catastrophically and sad. We have a president who does not believe in climate change. So like Donald Trump, it's Milei, as you might know that. And when Milei assumed, he immediately closed the Ministry of Environment. And the Secretary of Climate Change was kept but reduced, and they passed to they don't do any adaptation anymore. They don't do any adaptation, but they do have mitigation projects, because mitigation projects can attract money. So it's like, so even if they don't believe in climate change, they still see this way to be able to attract money from mitigation.
Thanks, thanks, Anna, for the example. Okay, if I go to the questions from the audience in the Q&A, I don't see anybody who has actually volunteered to give en vivo the questions, so I will read. But if any of you wish to do so, please identify yourself so the moderators can actually open your camera and your microphone. But let me start with, actually is related to also the politics and the citizens, a question that comes from an anonymous attendee. It's a question to you, Lan. Is there any results or examples or evidence that people of the city of Oslo, the citizens, do appreciate these policies that have been implemented that you describe? Is there, what is the citizens' response to this? Can you say a little bit about the process? And I know you have interesting experiences on that.
Yes, thank you. And I'm aware that I come from a very rich country and a rich city and a rich country where we have a lot of both money to spend on research and surveys and bureaucracy, and so it's quite different from a lot of other places. But what we did in Oslo when we established the climate agency, which I think is also an important step, because even though we want all the sectors to have responsibility for the actions that they need to do within their sector on adaptation and mitigation, they often lack the knowledge. We need someone to coordinate, so when we established this, we also established a website, or they established a website which is totally disconnected from the politicians, and they where they publish sort of news informations to the public, and also they do surveys every year about how citizens respond to different actions. And I guess that most of the actions that I implemented with the coalition that I was part of as vice mayor was really, there was turbulent times. I mean, we got a big mandate. We were kingmakers. We could basically sort of do a lot of things that we wanted to do. And we did a lot of things that people got angry about. Some people got angry about, like closing streets for cars, stuff like that. But what we saw from the surveys was that the majority, quite a large majority of the population liked what we did, because they saw that making the city greener, making it more both the mitigation and adaptation actions actually makes the city a better place to live. So a lot of the things that we did, for example, was opening up rivers that had been put in tubes, and that made good public spaces for people, and it's good adaptation both against heat waves and water, big rainwater events, and making it more accessible for pedestrians and bicyclists, is making it more accessible to everyone. So that's basically what we saw. What we see now from the latest surveys that I just looked into is that there is still a majority that support the sort of mitigation work, especially then of the city. But there's a bit of a dip among young people, which I think that we can also see some other places in the world as a sort of a political trend. So that's concerning, of course, but in general, we see that when we actually implement bold climate action that creates conflict, then people end up liking it, even though they might be unsure in the first sort of information phase. So my sort of learning point is that you should make the time between you say that you want to do something until you do it as short as possible within the legal frameworks and whatever, but as short as possible, because then when people see what the changes really look like, they might end up liking it, or they might adapt to it and sort of and give up to be that sort of have that kind of resistance. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Marie. We have a question from a colleague to you, Philippe, and this actually the question takes us a little bit towards the topic of Climate Europe 2, which is standardization. Judith Klosterman, our colleague, asks, your climate services seem to be constantly under development. The way you presented it, right? The design aims. So how will standardization help and will actually perhaps having acknowledged and accepted standards for climate services cause some trouble for the actual work that you do?
Interesting question. It's true that things are evolving constantly. Luckily, there are a few things happening in Europe that help us to deliver services that are that remain at a high quality level. I think one of the things that's very important for our activities is everything that's inside the Copernicus climate change service. So we try to use as much as possible data as input from the climate data store in the Copernicus climate change service, because that's really a standardized, that's a quality assured place of data. So yeah, so by using that, you already start from good data. Because it's indeed quite complex. There's so much data around that you don't see the forest through the trees, if that's the right expression. But so, yeah, we are acting more and more as let's say as a guide in the landscape of climate data. That's an important part of our job to make sure that the right data is used for the right purpose. There's constant evolution in the development of new methodologies in impact assessments. So we're filling in the gaps, the holes that are in there, but there are many gaps remaining in terms of impacts. If you want to include, if you want a holistic, a systemic impact assessment. So it is in constant evolution. And I think that an important thing that you can do as a service provider is to dedicate enough time to the validation of your activities. Include uncertainty assessments in your results, analyze what are important uncertainties and what are less important, because sometimes users come up with a measure that I think is so important, but if you then calculate it through or you evaluate it, it's only the second number after the comma, for example. So this distinguishing between important things and less important things is something also where we as service providers needs to help the users understand the results. Am I forgetting something? But I think also transparency is really important in this evolution, so that you can compare your current results to previous results, that it is traceable somewhere. So I think these are all practices, good practices that you need to include in your service delivery to be able to defend the results also afterwards and to compare them with current results. So, but it is challenging, and it's a field in evolution, and I think this will continue for a couple of years in the future. So we're not yet there to have a fully standardized, if ever possible, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully we can all contribute to actually making this happen.
Yeah.
Great. There is a question for you, Paco. Maybe you can take this. The question is about whether the continued prioritization of mitigation over adaptation policies in the European sphere is actually driven more by political factors than by practical considerations.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it has to do a lot with the markets and not just with policy making. I think Anna already pointed at what happens in Argentina. So the market is driving, for instance, the role that mitigation is still having, even when a government is moving to a very extreme view about anthropogenic climate change. So the market forces are probably interacting with political forces to really make mitigation more visible, more relevant in policy making. At the same time, I think at the European level, something interesting is happening, and it's that while Europe was very innovative in the implementation of a carbon market that has been enforced for a very long time already, the social awareness of the consequences of human-induced climate change are making societies aware that something has to be done to protect them, while the decisions on how quickly to mitigate are actually taking place. And there is a very strong socially driven awareness and a push to the political side to do something. The main problem with adaptation is that it's much more scattered than the mitigation efforts, because it cuts across many different sectors. So politically is very difficult to manage, much more than mitigation itself. And it requires funding of, if not the same, probably even more than mitigation, to really address all the vulnerabilities that European societies have in front of them. I don't want to discharge the European Commission of its responsibilities, but for instance, one of the missions that were created in the Horizon Europe program was a mission on adaptation to climate change and transformative societies, or something like this. It had an appendix in the title. The point is that the mission was created for adaptation and not for mitigation, and that the reason is, and Asun was one of the creators, one of the minds behind the creation of that mission. One of the reasons is that the mission was targeting local and regional administrations, and they are much more affected by adaptation than mitigation, basically because they are closer to the people. So somehow we tend to have the impression that mitigation is driving everything, while when we go to the local and regional levels, the policy making is actually focusing much more on adaptation, because this is what it's affecting people in the short term.
Thanks, thanks, Paco. And I think the differential of the perception, depending on the vulnerability of different regions of Europe, also has something to do. But Lan-Marie, I mean, you said in your presentation, unless I misunderstood you, that the type of policy packages and measures that you were describing have been implemented and also did require top-down, to be top-down. But and I presume by that top-down you mean the political will and the actual decision-making being in the hands of those who really make the decisions and the politicians, but that it cannot happen without also the participation of this bottom up. So I guess we get this contradiction. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. And the reason why is that well, making something sector wide and to sort of make leaders in all agencies and sectors prioritize something different requires leadership. So what we did was that we were very clear from my perspective, from my colleagues from the Labour Party's perspective, which I also think was important, that climate change should be the focus of all departments. So even the fire department came to me and told me that they were looking into fire, cars without emissions and stuff like that, which I said was okay, but it's important that you put out fires as well. But I think that's important. But at the same time, as we know that we have to do things fast, and as the service providers in the cities on the sort of the front line, they are the ones who knows how precipitation events in the winter time affect their service provision, for example, which if they can't take away the snow, then it creates mobility problems and health problems and security problems. So at the same time, we need to have their constant input on how climate change is actually affecting on the ground service provision. And so that's one, but what they also uncovered in the first analysis that was done in 2020 was that actually a lot of this, or not a lot, but quite many of the schools were built on quicksand in Oslo. And they also uncovered that we don't really know in an area like Oslo, where a lot of Oslo was underwater in ancient times, how quicksand will respond to 20% more precipitation, like more water in the system, and those are the kind of things that all sectors need to be aware of when they plan where to put infrastructure, and that should put in the legal frameworks that regulate where we put infrastructure. So that's why we also need the continuous cyclist sort of input. On mitigation, it's what I experienced. I worked mostly on mitigation because adaptation was only fully included in the climate budget last year, and we're not in government anymore. But on mitigation, we just saw that when we set goals on how that we wanted to become a zero emission city by 2030, and the system started to work, then they uncovered legal gaps. They uncovered things that they didn't, like cuts of emissions that they didn't know how to really do, or they didn't have the money or the things that they needed to cut them. So I think that's also why we need a constant input, because we actually need to develop policies as we go. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, we are actually running out of time. We have 1 minute left, and I would like to give the floor for your just one final thought to all of you, and also before I let you go, there is some remaining questions in the Q&A that you can actually answer in writing to the audience, and would like to encourage you to do that. But for now, and before we say goodbye, just one last thought, Anna.
It would be interesting if you would address the global situation, or how is this working in Europe? I mean, this push against science in general, and climate science in particular. We are feeling this really strong in Argentina right now. And thank you all. It was very interesting to participate.
Right. Paco, final thought for now?
Yeah, just that we are confronted with really very interesting opportunities here if we bring both adaptation and mitigation together. I think it's a fantastic field for early career scientists.
Thanks. Philippe, very short.
Yeah, first of all, we have to thank the organizers because I think it's interesting. It's really enriching to bring together politicians with scientists, with the different aspects of society. I think we need more of this integrated discussions. Sometimes we are a bit working in our silos. It's like Paco said at the beginning, this containerization of mitigation adaptation is causing also a bit the divide between the two. So we need more integration, I would say.
Thank you, Philippe. Lan, one last thought.
The last thought is just that I would love to see more research on governance structures and the integration of climate services on the city level.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for this great discussion. So now to our audience, there will be a half an hour coffee break. And at 11:30, the Webstable will resume with an excellent panel that will dwell more concretely into the cities and with some city representatives to continue this discussion. Thank you very much for being with us, and see you around.